No. Just use it. I know. Just read it. No. Yeah. Yeah, I had something else. I was thinking.
She's sending around the recordings too. She sent me 2 videos and she sent me.
I saw that.
Okay, folks, it's 7:45, and for those watching online, if you want to ask a question, there should be some place on your screen where it says chat or something like that, and something flashing so that you can type your questions there, and I'll see them. So, despite the midterm elections yesterday and comments from somebody in the peanut gallery out there earlier this evening, we're not going to be talking about the midterm elections and the results of that. I wanted to talk about instead the tragedy in Pittsburgh. It's already, 10 days ago or more than that since that happened. And of course, the news has already moved away from Pittsburgh, but hopefully we'll never forget. And I wanted to talk about this topic of anti-Semitism and just reflect further on a little bit that I had said on Sunday morning, immediately after the shootings that Shabbat, when we had our own smaller service separate from what we did with B'nai Shalom of Olney on that Tuesday evening. And that so that Sunday morning I said that in my lifetime I've never experienced an event like that on American soil, and we as an American Jewish community, that was the most violent act of anti-Semitism against us in our history here, since we've been in America since 1654. That's a pretty long history on American soil, and one in which we've been proud of the fact that that our government has always sought to protect the rights and liberties of all minorities and all citizens of the country. So that personally, in my lifetime, understood, I've had a very cloistered upbringing in that I went to Jewish day school all my life, and except for 7th grade. So for 6th and 7th grade, we were living in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and the day school there went up to 6th grade, and 7th grade was an option. If we had enough kids, you needed 5 kids from the graduating 6th grade class to make it a go for 7th grade, and there were 4 boys who were willing to continue and 1 girl. And the 1 girl didn't want to be the only girl in the class, so had to go to public school that year. And then we moved to Philadelphia, and I went to what was then called Akiba Hebrew Academy. I went to Temple University, but I commuted, so I didn't live on campus. And I went to Gratz College, Jewish Studies College at night. And then the only time I lived away from home was at Hebrew University for my junior year. So not exactly a place of Temple University itself was a multi-ethnic university, but I went to a suburban campus of it. So I was on the main campus in North Philly for one semester, but then the rest of the time I was at a suburban campus. So it was a pretty protected upbringing, and did not have any experience of anti-Semitism. And I know that people here might have experienced personally some insults, things like that. And we know stories of quotas at colleges and professional schools that would limit the amount of Jewish people that could be admitted to school. I mean, and I know this. My son is in medical school at Howard University, and Dr. Marvin Schneider is a graduate of Howard University Medical School at a time when Howard University was a place that Jews could go. It was a time when medical schools had quotas for Jews, and he was one of 10 Jews in his class at Howard University Medical School at the time. My son is the only Jew in his class of 120. And so it's not because of a quota or anything, it's just the way it is. And a lot of us don't have that experience with anti-Semitism, and that experience that we do have would be with relatives, God forbid, who were killed by the Nazis during World War II, during the Holocaust, or family members who survived and were able to come to America as a result. So our experience then with anti-Semitism is either personal with just insults, or with this event that happened 10 days ago. Whereas we have a long and storied history of violent acts of anti-Semitism against us, whether it is through the church as policy of the church to forcibly convert Jews to Christianity or kill them during the Inquisition that started in 1492. Not a coincidence that Columbus sailed a day after the edict that was from King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella that Jews had to leave Spain. So there are theories around that there might have been some of those conversos on Columbus's one of the three boats that left in August of 1492. And before that, and no matter where Jews were living, Jews were told that if they were allowed to have a synagogue, the synagogue had to be couldn't be any taller than the house of worship that of the country that they were living in, whether it's the church or the mosque. They had to dress a certain way. I'm not telling you anything new, but this is part of our history, and that has been able to be pushed aside and to the very back of our minds while living in America, because we didn't have to worry about this. We remember this from learning about it, stories about it from our relatives, etc. But personally, we haven't had personal experience, so it's not in the forefront of our minds. And so when this horrific, heinous crime happened on Shabbat at Tree of Life Synagogue, then it kind of brings all that history to life and reminds us that it's never easy to be Jewish. So I have several articles that I had. I'm sorry that I printed them for the environmentalists among us, that I should have just left them on the computer and just referred to them that way, but it's just easier for me, being the old-fashioned kind of person that I am sometimes. I like to have it, the paper edition of it. So some of us may have seen the newspaper on Monday. Was it Monday? Was November 4th Monday? No, Sunday. That's Sunday. Sunday's paper had an article, I think it was Sunday's paper, had an article about young Jews in DC, part of this social justice kind of group called Avodah. It's a national program where it's kind of like a post-college program for students who just don't have a plan yet of what they want to do next after they graduate college. So instead of going to the Peace Corps or doing Teach for America, I think that's what that's called, there's this Jewish version where you can do some volunteer work. And so there are two Avodah groups that meet that are based in DC. They have their own kind of place to live, so they're kind of socializing with one another, doing Jewish things together, and volunteering in the community, whether it's in schools or other kinds of social action kind of programs. So all these Jews are 22, 23 years old, something like that, and they were quoted in this article. And then it was only later that I found out that my future daughter-in-law is quoted in this article too. And she's not part of Avodah. She actually has a job as she has a master's in special education and works for the Montgomery County Public Schools. But the reporter from the Washington Post not only went to the Avodah location, but also was at the rally last Monday night at Addis Israel, and just so happened to quote my future daughter-in-law, who was talking about her grandfather was on the St. Louis, and so managed to get on that boat, but then had to go back to Europe and somehow survive the Holocaust. And so Gabi did a semester abroad in Copenhagen, and she was there that semester when the synagogue was attacked. Right? Do you remember that? In 2015, there was a shooting at a synagogue on a Saturday night, and where she was staying with all the other students, so her students from abroad, it was just 2 blocks away. So very, very close there. So she says, I felt honestly a little naive as the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors that I could be shocked by something like this, the events in Pittsburgh. She emailed her grandfather from her study abroad program at the time in 2015, telling him how distraught she was by the shooting. He replied with just one line. He said that it's hard being a Jew. So for young Jews, it's not hard being a Jew. But for people of a certain generation, you always have it in the back of your mind that, and sometimes it's brought forward, that it is hard being a Jew. So there's that article. And then, just interrupt me if you have any questions or comments. And also, if you're watching online, you can type in a question too. If you're familiar, there's an online Jewish magazine called Tablet. And you can get a daily email from them about articles of Jewish interest, whether it's cultural or current events or something like that. Tablet, I highly recommend it. And Jonathan Sarna, who is a preeminent historian of American Jewish history, is like the person. And he wrote the book several years ago on the occasion of the 350th anniversary of Jews being in America, which is an amazing book. And so he's an amazing historian, and his father was a preeminent Bible scholar. So he lived up to the scholarship in his family, and he teaches at Brandeis University. And so he's the expert on American Jewish history. And so if we think, so we know that this is the most violent act against Jews in the history of America, and he brings to light something that happened in 1958 in Atlanta. So
I didn't know anything about it until I just saw it in the headline.
Right. So does anybody know what happened in Atlanta? October 12th, 1958. So there was a synagogue, the Reformed synagogue in Atlanta called the Temple, was bombed. And nobody was killed, but in the early morning hours of October 12th, 1958, exactly 60 years to the month before the massacre of 11 Jews in Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue, a nitroglycerin bomb equal to 50 sticks of dynamite tore apart the temple, the oldest and most distinguished Reformed congregation in Atlanta. The sound of the blast traveled heavily for miles, Melissa Fay Green recounts in her all too timely history of that sadly forgotten anti-Semitic episode. She wrote The Temple Bombing. The Confederate Underground, the group that claimed credit for the attack, promised in a telephone call to blow up all communist organizations. Negroes and Jews are hereby declared aliens. And so apparently there were several synagogues that were bombed or attempted to be bombed over the course of several years by this group. And after two jury trials against them, yes, in the end, two Georgia juries failed to convict anyone in this bombing. And the Ralph McGill, the courageous liberal editor of the Atlanta Constitution, that's the main newspaper in Atlanta, blamed the demagogic rhetoric of the state's segregationist politicians for the bombings. Segregationists responded with outrage, suggesting that the bombing was instead part of a conspiracy to bring national discredit upon the South at a time when it's fighting integration of its public schools. So if we think that the event of Pittsburgh happened in a vacuum, it's not. And if we think that it never happened before in America, this attempt to kill lots of Jews, that happened before too, 60 years ago. And so then the other articles I have are just different perspectives on how we respond to such an event. So what I would like to suggest is that there are some people who are suggesting that there's a political nature to the person who that also prompted him to do the bombing. That, in other words, there was encouragement and an atmosphere that permitted not only this rhetoric against anybody who's not in favor of the white nationalist vision of what America is supposed to be, according to them, and that this rhetoric is coming from the highest leadership in this country, and is promoted at rallies all the time. And in fact, the highest leader in our country said in a rally shortly after the bombing, the shooting in Pittsburgh, that it's a shame that this shooting happened because it affected the momentum of that was building towards the elections. So yes, so when there's rhetoric like that, and when there's no stop to or reining in of such hatred on all forms of social media, then it shouldn't be a surprise that one person would decide to act on it, right? So in other words, I still remember when there weren't computers, and that the only thing that people had to get their message across was radio, television, or newspaper, right? And there were limits. There are limits of what can get on TV, what can be on radio, what can be in a newspaper. So it's something that is clearly anti-Semitic or bigoted or anything like that. It's not allowed to be printed, and you can't say it on TV or on the radio. But on social media, you can. There are. Unless there's like an image of blood and dripping from a gun, anything short of that, people are allowed to share on social media. So that there's that element to the nature of not just anti-Semitism, but hatred against all groups of people who are different than we are. David.
Well, if you go back to the newspapers, if you took newspapers, I'll say even in Washington, D.C., there was hatred printed in them. They were clearly segregationists, anti-Jewish, anti-this, anti-that, and they were printed in the newspapers.
Okay, so David is suggesting that papers did print this. So, are you from what time period? Are you saying like in the civil rights era?
Yeah.
You're saying right? Okay, so yes, so certainly in the South, you would have there would be certain newspapers. I guess yes, I would. Yeah. So then you have the cases brought to the Supreme Court in terms of integrating public schools, and then the Civil Rights Act that was passed in Congress in the 60s that brought an end to all of that officially. Right. So, yes, Barbara, what were you going to say?
My aunt used to live in New York, in the Brooklyn area, and then she ended up moving to South Carolina. And she was told very quickly that it's not safe to keep on advertising that you're Jewish and that you belong to Hadassah and so forth.
Right.
So if they said it would make life difficult for you just don't advertise it.
Right.
So even though there wasn't this, a lot of this, quote, violence.
Right.
The feeling was there, it was kind of suppressed.
Right.
And it was done in making life difficult.
Yes.
But not enough to be in the paper.
Right. So yes. So what Barbara is bringing out is cultural norms that would be accepted in certain parts of the country in terms of attitudes towards non-Christians in their neighborhood. So telling a story of her aunt from Brooklyn who moved to South Carolina. So right. So in a certain generation, you just knew where you were in the country and whether it would be safe to publicly show and exhibit who you are. And yes, so I can't imagine being African American in this country because it's still not exactly safe anywhere all the time for African Americans to go freely, and certainly Jewish people. So I've only lived on the East Coast, and even though I didn't grow up wearing a kippah all the time, despite the fact of going to Jewish day school, since rabbinical school, I've been wearing a kippah all the time, wherever I am. And though every now and then somebody looks at me, nobody says anything to me. And whether I was living in north of Boston, or I was in school in New York, or been here for 25 years, I've never had a problem wearing a kippah and never thought twice about it. I do sometimes think twice about it when I'm on vacation, depending where I'm on vacation. If I'm on vacation in Europe, I do not wear a kippah out in the open. And so Lenore and I spent a few days in Paris a number of years ago, and we went to kosher restaurants there. And I thought a little bit before walking into the restaurant about whether it was safe, but we went there anyway. And I put my kippah on once I got in the restaurant. But walking, even in the neighborhood, the Le Marais neighborhood there, did not wear a kippah. So it's in Europe, I understand that, and in America, really, I have felt okay. But I think it's a generational thing, and I think that just the fact that all these Jewish actors who had to change their names, actors and comedians and television personalities, had to change their last names in order to succeed in business, right? George Burns, Jack Benny, you name them and list them. You all know that what their real names were, Kirk Douglas. And all of them had to change their name, felt like they had to change their names in order to succeed. And so again, this is a wake-up call to me and certainly to the younger generation about what it means to have an attack like this, and now how to respond to this obvious rise in hatred and the condoning of hate speech throughout our society. So one way that we understand, and it's almost like preaching to the choir and saying this, is that vigil that we had last Tuesday night and attended by so many interfaith clergy. And so I feel blessed to be part of the Greater Olney Interfaith Clergy Association and to co-chair it and kind of, so I have people's email addresses and I let them know about the vigil and that they would be welcome. And after the events of that Shabbat in Pittsburgh, I got emails from some colleagues from that association, and then people said that they were going to be coming, and that so many came was really quite the testament. So that at least here in our suburban Maryland, we hopefully have the majority of the population agrees that we should, that likes the diversity that's around here, and that promotes a sense of love and harmony within the community. And so I think, though, that if we were living in rural Kentucky or Alabama or other parts of the country, it might not be so easy to build bridges like that within the community, and also not sure that religious institutions of other faiths would be so open to say that love your neighbor, as opposed to everybody has to accept the Lord this particular way. So I think so. There's the interfaith clergy and that feeling the sense of support from them, and there's certainly which I've just been feeling so overwhelmed with these past 2 years about getting involved in social justice issues. There's so many social justice issues to be involved in that it's just you don't know where to start to try to get it. Start getting involved in one thing and then some other issue, whether it's gun control or whether it's immigration or whether it's anti-Semitism. It's just all these issues that are just overwhelming, and we're confronted with all the time. You don't know where to begin to get involved. And so we're also fortunate that Lisa Hedgepath and our Social Action Committee is at least steering a course towards just focusing on hatred and harmony and unity in the community, and focusing our social justice agenda in that direction, knowing that there's still lots of other things to do as well. So I think that these other articles that I have here all speak, from whatever perspective they're coming from, right or left. They say that it's clear that the Jewish situation in America and the nature of the Jewish community in America has always been to be involved in social justice, to be in the forefront of social justice, marching with Abraham Joshua Heschel, marched with Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama. Jews were in the forefront of the civil rights movement. Jews have been in the forefront of a whole variety of social justice issues in our country in its past, and that's the way to combat anti-Semitism, not to cower in fear, we need to recognize that this is part of the Jewish condition, that knowing that there will always be people who will hate us for who we are, but that at the same time, we have to take advantage of the fact that we are living in a free society and that we have to ensure that it's a free society for all. So any thoughts or comments or about this? Yes, Julie.
The massacre in Pittsburgh was one person who was writing
on a blog,
writing a wave of what he was hearing, what he was feeling.
Right.
But prior to that, the civil rights movement was groups of people that were coming down on the blacks and making it difficult. Now, Barbara's aunt, suffered in South Carolina, but yet there are congregations in South Carolina.
Sure.
And old congregations. Yes,
one of the original six.
Right.
That at the time of the Declaration of Independence was in Charleston.
Right. And so, but
there were synagogues there, but other than that you didn't
advertise that you were Jewish, right?
You didn't advertise it.
Right.
I mean, if you want to stand by the synagogue and see who's coming in or out,
right,
you knew who it was. But if you had some kind of special meeting,
right,
you had it at someone's house, and you didn't.
Right.
And the people that went to the meeting, they knew it.
Right.
You didn't make it.
Right.
Oh, I'm going to.
Yeah. So, but it's not unique to South Carolina. It's common in certain areas of the country that you just knew that you can't advertise that.
So all that.
But I think that's different today. I don't know. Well, I certainly in North Carolina, which isn't far from South Carolina, that when I interviewed at a synagogue in Raleigh, maybe because of all the universities there, could be a more liberal area. And certainly wherever Jews are living, if they're living in cities, some of the cities in the South are still liberal-minded. I think it's just different today than it was whenever your aunt moved there. So I'm not denying that still in certain parts of the country that it might be kind of unusual, and you get a lot of looks if you wore a kippah out in public or to say, hey, come to the Hadassah meeting. But still, yes, right. So the 60s is a different time. Miriam.
What do you think can be done in this environment by individuals, by our communities?
Apart from, so Miriam's asking, so what can we do? So, we, on the one hand, we have to be vigilant to ensure that we're safe. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. And certainly, it's not a knee-jerk reaction to this and thinking, okay, now we have to be under siege. Certainly we don't need to do that, but it's appropriate to ensure that we're safe. The fact that the Montgomery County Police Department last week was vigilant with us, where the police chief came out publicly saying that he's going to be providing in the short term an increased presence for all Jewish institutions, reinforces the message, hey, Jewish community, don't worry. Something like that is not indicative of a new wave in this country of accepted anti-Semitism. Quite the opposite. We're proving to you that we are here as we have always been. And so the other thing about the vigil that was important, I think, to point out is not just the interfaith clergy and laity that were there participating in the vigil, but also all the elected officials who were there, and also the police and the fire department that was there as well. So just being present in uniform, knowing, so that giving the subconscious message, hey, this is the rule of law exists in this country. So what can we do about it? I think we need to not just to be vigilant about our security, but also to be extra vigilant in our advocacy work. But I'm not sure how to do that when it comes to the social media. So, because I was listening to NPR today, Terry Gross and Fresh Air, interviewing somebody who just published an article that's going to come out in the New York Times Magazine on Sunday, and that how the FBI investigates potential threats domestically in our country, like terrorist cells, but apparently has not done so with these white supremacists. And that this author, just read the article, it's available online now on the New York Times website, but this article will be in the New York Times Magazine on Sunday, that she documents how throughout the country, all these cells are out there, but there's not one particular leader of all of them. So it's kind of hard to find one leader and go after that one leader. And the other thing is, politically, they haven't gotten the okay to pursue it, as opposed to all the money and effort going into finding cells of Al-Qaeda or ISIS here in America. So where those threats have been minimal, actually, documented, whereas white supremacists, the incredible increase in vandalism, anti-Semitic vandalism in this country, graffiti and things like that, has been on the rise in the past 2 years. That's been so we just need to be vigilant to that and make sure that our elected officials are pursuing that and ensuring that there will be some kind of concerted effort from on high to quash this kind of rhetoric. So I think that lobbying Congress and Senate to come up with some kind of reasonable guidelines for reining in Facebook and Instagram and all other social media outlets to make it a crime to post anything like that. I think that's something that we can advocate for. And then continued, the sign that we have in front of our property, the hate has no home here, and being involved in efforts like that, in which we are working with other minority groups and disadvantaged populations and et cetera, to say that they're all God's creatures and that we're all holy and we all are deserving of loving one another. Joe.
You just kind of answered my question or said, with what we should do.
Yeah.
But Rhea gave a talk you were talking about South Carolina. She gave a talk on Holocaust Remembrance Weekend in Myrtle Beach.
Right.
At a conservative shul. And I'm talking with people before it starts.
Yeah.
Because that's what I do.
Right.
And it was explained by the rabbis originally from Israel. They had an incident where somebody made accusations against the Jews in Myrtle Beach, and they went to his basement. And he was full of arms, and he was a serious threat, and they arrested him. He would contact some black churches and the Jews.
Wow.
That synagogue there.
Right.
So anyway, the guy says to me, so it was decided that 6 of us would carry pistols.
Oh.
Go to shul,
right.
And we would be in charge, and one of us would be there.
Yeah.
And I kind of looked, I wanted to see if he was one of them.
Yeah.
But I couldn't see that he had a pistol. you were just talking about, I think that's a problem. I would not
Right.
recommend that because, I think about owning a gun.
Right.
And I think, you have to take care of it. You gotta clean it. You gotta make sure there's
Right.
no accident. And then you gotta know if you're gonna use it or not.
Right.
Even if it's justified to pull it out and use it, can you really use it well and in the
Right.
right way? And, like on television, the
Yeah.
good guy always wins. That doesn't happen.
So two
So-
things I want. Yeah.
So I think your overall, what you said is the way to think about it, and I don't.
So there have been people. So Joe was just pointing out a story from Myrtle Beach, and that the rabbi of that synagogue suggested that people should carry.
The police. The rabbi accepted it,
Uh-huh.
but.
I thought you meant members of the synagogue were carrying.
Yes, they were.
Uh-huh.
But the police, they have open carry.
Yes.
Much more
Right.
conservative.
Right. So
The rabbi accepted it.
Yes.
Because of his background as an.
right.
But anyway.
Yes. So I just wanted to respond to that, to open carry. So first of all, so my politics on this will be clear that I'm totally opposed to something like that, and I'm in favor of the strictest gun control law. I'm voting for it. That being said, I understand completely people's reaction of wanting to protect us in the synagogue, and those, I don't know if there's any member of the congregation that has a permit to carry a weapon, that they might want to do this. So there was a security meeting last Monday at the Federation office, held by JCRC and the Federation, and Sunflower Bakery has a cafe there. So I was just an advertisement for Sunflower Bakery here. So I was sitting there having a cup of coffee before the meeting starts, and listening in on a conversation at a table next to me, where the person is the president of Kemp Mills Synagogue. It's clear from the conversation, and that people in his congregation are talking about bringing weapons to, when they come to shul, to have a weapon on them, and that they are members of the synagogue who have, whether that because of their jobs in the government, they have a permit to carry a weapon. And I'm thinking to myself, there's absolutely no way that I would permit something like that. That certainly, if we need to have police protection outside, I'd be happy with that. But inside the building, members of our synagogue walking in with guns, there's just something about a synagogue that and guns that just don't go together. And certainly, the temple in Jerusalem, the midrash behind how the temple in Jerusalem was built, no iron was used in building the temple in Jerusalem, and which is a reason why some people don't use a knife to cut the challah on Shabbat at your dinner table, that they rip it instead. They're not to have, because the challah represents not just the manna falling from heaven, but also the offering that was given in the temple in Jerusalem on Shabbat. So just as knives, metal implements weren't used in the construction of the temple, you shouldn't use a knife to cut challah on Shabbat. So, and there was a midrash that there was this creature that was created by God solely for the purpose of hewing the stones that were used in building the walls of the temple and the entire structure. This worm called the shamir. So that's just a rabbinic legend about so the fact that there was no iron implements in building the temple, and there's certainly no weapons of war brought into the temple. Anybody who came to the temple to bring a sacrifice or for whatever purpose had to leave the weapons outside. How much more so should we not have weapons inside the synagogue? So just in case anybody wanted to know my position on weapons, make it absolutely clear, no weapons.
Carries on into the school systems and everything else.
Well, that's true too, right. Now, there's more of an argument for it for schools because of how many school shootings there have been across the country.
But for the teachers, they have.
Well, right. So right. So we're getting into a whole other argument about how to protect our students in the schools and what kind of protection should be there for kids. Rightly so. Schools should be a safe place, just like a house of worship should be a safe place. If we're sending our kids to school every single day, we should know that they're going to a safe place. How do we make it safe for them? Is training teachers and to carry a gun the way to do it? Just because there aren't enough police to protect the schools? Okay, that's so. That's Judy. What were you gonna say?
I want to get back to social action.
Yes.
I mean, the fact is that there have been very few anti-Semitic incidents where people have been murdered as occurred.
Right. Right.
At the Tree of Life.
So there was something in Kansas City a couple of years ago, a shooting outside of the JCC, which also has their nursing home was across the street. So in that complex there was something in Los Angeles, and there was something in Seattle. So a couple people were killed in Los Angeles. I don't think they were all, and there was a shooting at the Holocaust Museum where the security guard was killed, right?
And we, as you pointed out, have enjoyed a lot of support from other religions and
Right.
clergy and politicians and police and a whole lot of support. And my question, I guess, for the broader Jewish community and for Shard to Fill Social Action specifically, is to what extent would the community, regardless of whether it's small community or large community, really become active on behalf of African Americans who are killed every day in this country by the police, who
Right.
feel they don't have the protection.
Yeah. Right.
Or immigrants who come here seeking refuge, who also are not being protected by the police, and in fact, the military is being deployed against them.
Right.
And in far greater numbers than the Jewish community. And the hatred is at least
Right.
as great, if not significantly greater. And the violence against them condone far more, I think, than
Right.
has been the reaction to Jews. And
Right.
so, to what extent should the social action of this synagogue and the community in general really be geared toward those two groups?
Right. So Judy is bringing out the So we're lauding and extolling the police and expressing gratitude for their support for us. Where at the same time, the police there have been police shootings of what are apparently unarmed African American teenagers and adults, and those we're aware of those cases across the country, from Ferguson, right, and that's right, and then also how the military is being deployed against this so-called caravan of infiltrators waiting to get into the country from Mexico. So this attitude from these very same that we're expressing gratitude to the police, or at the same time they are expressing this hatred towards and this active shooting of other minority groups in this country. And what should we do as a social action? So on the one hand, I'm shaking my head as you were talking, Judy, because it's just those are the issues among the tens and dozens of issues that have been brought to light in the past 2 years, where you say, okay, well, let's start getting involved in this one. But wait, there's something over here and there's something over here. And like, it's like nearly impossible to address everything in an appropriate way and a significant way. There's just so much to get involved in. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't get involved in it. I'm just not sure how effective we can be in all of these social justice issues. So the general broader topic of being aware of racism and bigotry in this country is what we're focusing on, and we're just getting the details together for the next Social Action Committee event, which will be a speaker hopefully on December 16th, about someone speaking from personal experience and about dealing with hatred like this and how he overcame it. So we'll get more information about that. But anyway, so we this is something very important, something that we need to. I think our Montgomery County Police has been good about this. We are. It's a very diverse community. When I remember a meeting that the rabbis had with the Muslim community. There are 192 countries represented in the Muslim community. So in Montgomery County, which is practically the whole world. So right there are 200 countries in the world. So 192 of them, and they're and the Muslim communities from them are all in Montgomery County. So it's wonderful, the diverse community that we have. And so, of course, then there's a lot that the officials and authorities in Montgomery County have to learn about the entire world community that lives in Montgomery County and the different cultural norms that are at play and how to keep everyone at peace. So, the fact that we have this interfaith liaison that is a paid position in Montgomery County has gone a long way in helping to bring diverse community together. And the person who spoke at our vigil, Reverend Casey Caseman, has done a lot of work, and his department has done a tremendous amount of work in bringing Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, all religions and all ethnicities together to learn from one another. So that's what we have to do. We have to promote activities that bring people together, that promote diversity, that help us understand. There's a prayer that we're supposed to recite when we see an unusual person, which could be anybody who looks just different than we do. And it's thanking God for Meshaneh Habriot, who varies the creatures, or it's kind of hard to translate it literally, who creates diversity in creation. So, that's a prayer. So it's a Jewish concept to appreciate that there are all colors of people, all sizes of people, all different kinds of people out there, and different kinds of animals and birds, et cetera, et cetera. So it just shows just how wonderful this world is, and we shouldn't be afraid of it. We should be happy about it and learn more about it. So. Any other thoughts or comments? So, all right. So have a good evening, everybody. The first Wednesday in December is December 5th, and we'll have another contemporary issue that we're talking about. Is it Hanukkah that night?
Yes.
It is. Okay, but hopefully the candles will have burnt out already by the time we come for 7:45, because it gets dark really early. And so hopefully you can make it. If not, you can watch online, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Yep.